Mic test. Okay, good.
I don't know what I mean is, did we get it to record the last class?
Yes. Okay. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Today inshallah we're going to be talking about the condemnation of zeal and covetousness and a praise of sufficiency and indifference toward others' properties. This is in line with Ghazāli's very long chapter headings, but it is not something, if we break it down inshallah, it's not too complicated. Basically he's talking about a condemnation of hirs and this idea of greed, right? Not to be greedy, not to covet. You guys know what covet means? It's to want, but it's a specific type of want.
It's to want what they have.
Yes.
And then not and then them not having.
Sure. So it's basically wanting, in summary, it's wanting what others has. Like, so if somebody else has something, this is what we call coveting. And this is an idea, and this is something that is obviously very problematic Islamically. So this idea of greed, this idea of coveting, both of these things are problematic. So he says the solution to that is sufficiency, this idea of qana'ah. Right, this idea of sufficiency is something that's really important. Also, having this indifference toward other people's wealth. Right, so if somebody else has something, I shouldn't what? No, well, not just I shouldn't care. Right, like whether that person has it or not is something that it shouldn't affect me. Right, it's something that in essence shouldn't affect me. So poverty. So when Ghazāli he talks about faqr, I want you guys to kind of give your input in what you have to say about this. It's a very interesting take, to say the least. But he says that know that poverty is praised, as has been described in the book of poverty. What do you think? Do you think faqr, or poverty in and of itself, is something that is praiseworthy? No? What? Ghazāli says so. It's right here. Poverty is praised.
Wealth is good too.
But he says wealth is good too. So what does he mean? Yes? So is he talking about it in an actual wealth sense, or is he talking about it in a spiritual sense? So if we say faqr, if we say poverty in a spiritual sense, what are we poor of? What do we need?
No, spiritual.
Spiritual. Yes. All right, so here, I don't think he's talking about actual fiscal poverty. I agree with what they're saying, that he's talking more so about spiritual poverty. But what does that actually mean? Yes?
You don't let your fiscal wealth affect you.
But he's still using the word poverty, yes.
Maybe it's
So, yeah.
because because if you're spiritually poor, you'll strive to earn more in that sort of sense versus like the physical poverty.
Okay.
Because you're not like fat and happy spiritually.
ماشي. تفضل. Yeah, go ahead. You're in need of Allah, right? This is when I'm poor, I'm in need of wealth, right? And if I'm spiritually poor, I'm in need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's what he's talking about here, because look at the next line. He says that the condition being that one is satisfied without the need of others, right? And if I don't have money, I still need what? If I can't feed myself, where am I going to go? Like, I'm going to go to others, right? Like, I'm going to talk to others and be like, hey, listen, I need help, I need to figure this out, I need a job, whatever the situation might be. But if I am not financially independent, I am financially dependent, right? There are only two choices that are here. And if I'm financially dependent, none of these things apply. None of these things apply. What is going to happen? I'm going to start turning to others. I'm going to start looking at what other people have. I'm going to be worried about how do I acquire wealth? Like, how do I get out of this situation? Nobody likes being poor, right? Nobody likes being poor. Nobody likes being impoverished. And he said, this is unaccomplishable, except if one has sufficiency in food, clothing, and shelter. This is something that we have stressed on and something that we have spoken about before. That if an individual is satiated, if an individual has clothes, that he is not worried about, whether they have holes or whether they're covering him or whether they're, even good enough many times for the weather, right? So if the only thing I have to wear is a sweater and I'm going to pray in the desert, like I'm going to feel really uncomfortable, right? This is the only thing that I have. Also, shelter. If I don't feel safe, like forget nice, like I have a nice house, but if I'm in a neighborhood that's unsafe, how am I going to feel? Right? I'm going to feel fear. So what effect are these things going to have? All of them essentially affect my khushu'. It affects my worship, right? It affects my ibadah. So let's continue on. Let's see what else he says. He says staying to the bare minimum. So if an individual, if I'm choosing to stay at the bare minimum, automatically what? I want you guys to think about that statement. I'm choosing to stay at the bare minimum. I'm controlling my nafs. So you guys are right, but I want you guys to kind of think about this individual who is in the state where they're choosing to be at the bare minimum. He himself is not what? He's not poor, right? If I choose to go lesser, that means what? I can go higher, but I'm choosing not to. If I am poor, do I have a choice? Right? Like, if I don't have any money, can I be like, well, I'm choosing to live, a life of poverty, and like I'm trying to be a zahid and I'm trying to be abstinent. Can a poor person be a zahid? Like, essentially, no, because they have no choice. Right? It's like a person saying, well, I didn't want to go to Harvard anyway. Can I say that? I didn't get in. Like, like if I applied and I got in and then I chose it, I can do what? I can say it then. I'd be like, yeah, I got accepted, but I didn't want to go. Right? Now I can actually say I didn't want to go. But if I have if I have like a D average, I'd be like, yeah, I'm not trying to go to Harvard. Like, they wouldn't accept you. Like, and there are certain situations in our lives, if I don't have a choice, in those situations where I don't have a choice, it doesn't give me the right now to to say or claim otherwise. Yes?
So he made that choice in his life, right?
Yeah.
Like, did that happen before he wrote this book or after? Like, any idea?
So Iḥyā is, if you actually look at a lot of the discussions that he has, it's almost as if he's cataloging events of his personal life and his personal journey. So do you guys know when Ghazāli was wealthy? At what point? At the end of his life? Beginning? Middle? Beginning? Okay. Anyone else? He was actually wealthy at the beginning of his life. Why? Because he went to Madrasa Nizamiyah. Now, Madrasa Nizamiyah would be equivalent to going to a very high-class school that guarantees you a high-paying job. Right? That's the type of setup that it was. Unfortunately, I can't really say that about colleges anymore. But it's like getting a cloud certificate, you know what I mean? Like, once you get the certificate, you'll get a high-paying job. So back in before, I would say, probably before the Industrial Revolution, the way for many Muslims to get ahead financially and fiscally outside of business was to go and study Sharia, right? You go study law, you study Sharia. Why? Because all of the high-paying government jobs were related to Sharia. So if I wanted to be a judge, if I wanted to be a scribe, if I wanted to be like a lawyer, right? Like there are different positions that were in the legal system. And if I wanted to take part in those positions, I have to go and learn Sharia. And those were very high-paying jobs. And why did they pay higher than other positions? Because they wanted to prevent the clerics from accepting what? Bribes, right? So what do? You set the pay scale a little bit higher so that people don't accept those bribes. Not because they're inherently pious, right? But the idea is to prevent corruption. So here, he went to Madrasa al-Nizamiyya. He went to study Sharia. And not just study Sharia, he studied under Imam al-Haramain, who was probably one of the greatest living scholars at that time. And he himself was a genius, right? Like he was a genius. He would get concepts like this. Like they would present concepts, and he's already answering the question before the sheikh is even finishing the mas'ala or the issue that's being discussed. All of his other classmates are falling behind. And all of a sudden, after some time, after some studying, he's studying, he's looking around, and he sees that all of these mashayikh, they're dressed like really nicely. They almost have like a uniform, and when they're walking, who's behind them? Like they're students, and they're just just imagine they're going around with like their entourages, and it still exists. Like, so if you guys actually look in like certain like religious circles, you'll find that it still exists. Like you still have the sheikh, and you have like all the students who are like kind of falling behind him. Even I've been to gatherings where like they've invited me. They said, okay, we're gathering like the imams and like the mashayikh and stuff. So I would go to the gathering, and I would be alone. Obviously, I don't have a lot of friends. So then I would go alone, and then you would have some of these other like mashayikh, and there'd be like 5 people with them, and I was like, what is this? Like, what's going on? I'm like, yeah, who's that? They're like, yeah, those are his students.
He got more Imam.
Yeah, he got more Imam clout. So this idea still exists, right? This idea of the clergy or the clerics having this entire entourage. And then when Ghazāli realized this, what did he do? That's when he went to Damascus. That's when he left. He's like, no, this is wrong. This is not how it should be. The Prophet ﷺ didn't come with the religion for this purpose. It wasn't meant to be like this. So he went to Damascus, and what did he do in Damascus? He became a janitor. Ahsant, yeah, absolutely. He became a janitor. He would clean the masjid. And why was he doing this? Some of the stuff that we're talking about here. Right? He wanted to reset his gauge. Right? So in order for him to reset his gauge, he was at the highest, most popular, best school in the entire Islamic empire. Yes?
Oh, sorry. I thought Imam Ghazāli had a following, that's why he left. Because people were starting to
No, people are starting to follow him. So like he didn't care for the he didn't want the lifestyle. He's like no, this is not what this is for. This is not the point. So he went off to Damascus. Why did he go to Damascus?
Choose to be poor.
Right, to choose to be poor. And he went to Damascus on purpose because he didn't know anyone there, right? Like no one knew him, he didn't know anyone there, and he got there because the thing is, just imagine if you have somebody who's so famous, somebody who's so well known, going to a place where somebody recognizes him, what's going to happen? Right, he's not going to be able to reset his gauge, he's not going to be able to escape what it was that he was trying to escape. So he was there, he worked as a janitor, and after I think a couple of years, he was actually outed. And how was he outed? Because while he was cleaning, he overheard a discussion of like a fiqh discussion, and the teacher asked a question. And as the students were leaving, he said, he's like, what was the question, that the sheikh asked? And he was like, so the student was like, he said this and this and this. Imam Ghazāli, being so intelligent, what did he say? He's like, yeah, that's da-da-da-da, right? He just gave an answer. And then they came back the next day, and then he was like, okay, who has the answer? Nobody had the answer except the student. And he's like, okay, you didn't come up with this answer. Like that wasn't you. Who told you this? He was like, the janitor. So he's like, what are you talking about? He's like, no, the janitor, I'm serious. Like this guy over here, he's like, the guy who cleans the masjid. He's like, yeah, the guy who cleans the masjid. So at that point, and then he left Damascus back at that point, and then he went back. And he even calls his book Iḥyā, right? The revival. Why does he call it the revival of the Islamic sciences? So Iḥyā Ulūm al-Dīn, the revival of the Islamic sciences, because of what he saw happening with the Islamic sciences. You good, Fahmi? Sure? You want to come sit here?
In his revival.
All right. So this, somebody had a question? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you said his teacher was Imam al-Haramain.
Yeah,
Who was it?
Juwayni.
Okay.
Yeah. So, what was I talking about? Fahmi. Yes, Fahmi.
No, the
So the revival of the Islamic sciences. Why did he call it this revival? Because what he saw happening with the Islamic sciences is that it was no longer becoming a means to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it was actually becoming a means for people to get clout and for people to get rich. So throughout this entire discussion, we see him like constantly like fighting against wealth, fighting against clout, fighting against, seeking what's in the hands of others, fighting against, and why is that? Because these are the things that he actually saw. So he says here, you have to stay with the bare minimum, and he said that this individual, he needs to only worry about his daily, at the most, his monthly expenditure. He shouldn't go beyond that. And he says the moment that his desire exceeds that time frame, oh, oops, dang, my animation's messed up then. Anyway, so here, the bare minimum, the idea is to focus on the daily and monthly expenditures, right? This is what he's saying should be focused on. And then he says, if you go beyond this, now you have entered into beyond being satisfied. You're no longer satisfied with what you have. And in true Ghazālian fashion, what is he going to do? Now he's going to start creating a negative feedback loop. And what is that negative feedback loop? He's saying that at this point, your heart is now irrevocably corrupted. He said you have passed qana'ah, right? You've passed this level of satisfaction, because satisfaction is supposed to be here. And the moment you went past that, you are now corrupted. And you're corrupted, why? Through stinginess and greed. And again, we've entered, remember, one of the first things that he talks about when he talks about tama', when he talks about this idea of greed, when he talks about this idea of stinginess, these things, they start corrupting the heart, which leads to other bad character traits. So he, like we said, in true Ghazālian fashion, once you open the door, for him, he's like, well, it's very easy now to step through that door. And now that I have bad character, I'm going to become what? I'm going to become greedier and stingier. And then it's just going to cycle here. I'm going to revisit this at the end of class, okay? I'm going to come back to this, and I want you guys to kind of think about this. So, yes?
I mean, monthly, that's a good mental model, but is that the world we live in today?
I think it's the world
what's expenditure?
we could always live in. We can talk about expenditure. I think that's an important discussion. Satisfaction, I think, is an important discussion. I think there are a number of things that need to be touched on in that. I don't think the model is wrong. Don't get me wrong. I don't think the model is wrong. I think it's important to understand it through the correct lens. So here, there's a very famous hadith. If the son of Adam had 2 valleys of money or 2 valleys of gold, he would wish for a third. And for nothing can fill the belly of Adam except dust. What does that mean? Death, right? It's like the only time you'll actually be full is when you're dead. That's it. This hadith is in Bukhari and Muslim. Another narration. You have Abu Harb ibn Abu al-Aswad. He reported on the authority of his father that Abu Musa al-Ashari, he sent for the reciters of Basra, the Qurra. They came to him, and there were 300 in number, and they recited the Quran, and he said, you are the best among the inhabitants of Basra, for you are the reciters among them. So continue to recite it, the Quran, but bear in mind that you're reciting for a long time may not harden your hearts, as were hardened the hearts of those before you. We used to recite a surah which resembled in length and severity to Surah Bara'ah. I have, however, forgotten it with the exception of this, which I remember out of it. If there were 2 valleys full of riches for the son of Adam, he would long for a 3rd valley, and nothing would fill the stomach of the son of Adam but dust. This is an indication of what? So here you have Abu Musa saying that, well, there was more Quran that we used to recite, but I forgot. Meaning what? He's saying, what did he say here? He said that we. He didn't say I. This is more of a discussion, I understand, for preservation of Quran.
It's like the abrogation.
Abrogation, ahsant. Perfect. That's exactly what happened here. So basically, if the verses were taken, that means that they are abrogated. But he said, I remember this, right? So there's a discussion of this. In this verse, right, at that time, the Prophet, instead, it became a hadith, right? So it is no longer Quran, and now it is hadith. And he goes on to say, and we used to recite a surah which resembled one of the surahs of Musabbihat, and I've forgotten it, but I remember this much, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, lima taqulu ma la taf'alun, that you who believe, why do you say things and then do not do them? And then, وَكُلُّ إِنسَانٍ أَلْزَمْنَاهُ طَائِرُهُ فِي عُنُقِهِ وَنُخْرِجُ لَهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ كِتَابًا يَلْقَاهُ مَنْشُورًا, that we have bound each human being's destiny to his neck. On the day of resurrection, we shall bring out a record for each of them, which they will find spread wide open. And again, this is talking about accountability, right? And the individual accountability that we have with the wealth that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us all with. Two types of greed are never satiated. The greed of knowledge is never filled, and the greed of wealth is never filled. The son of Adam grows old, and so also too grow old with him hope and wealth. Meaning what? What is hope that he's talking about here? Living a long life. Living a long life, right? We all hope that we get old and be rich. And he said, if this is the crooked nature of man, inherently destructive, Allah and His Messenger encourage satiety, qana'a, right? This idea of satisfaction. It is something that is very, very important. Why? Because satiety and satisfaction is what? It's rida, yeah. But here, let me put it another way. Can I control how much money is coming in if it's written for me? No, I can't. Can I control how long I'm going to live? No. So over here, what can we control? Al-barakah, even barakah. How I deal with it. And that dealing with it is exactly what qana'a is. Meaning that satiety and qana'a and being happy is what? It's a choice. It's a choice. It's not something that, that comes from outside. And we had talked about this previously. If I keep looking for happiness outside, I'm never going to what? Right? I'm never going to find it. I'm never going to achieve it, right? Because the moment I get to that next point, what's going to happen? Right? There's something else. And then the moment I get that, there's something else. True happiness is only here, right? True happiness is only in the heart. Here is the next hadith. There is no rich man or poor man, but he will wish on the day of resurrection that he had been given the bare minimum of provision. Why? Because it distracted him. Good. What else? Because of the responsibilities that come with it, right? The more money Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us, the more, right? The more responsibility that comes with it. Right? These are things that are very important. There are more rights that come with it. I don't know if you guys have heard of the phrase, freedom isn't free. Ever heard that one? Why? What does it cost? Right. What else? No, something even greater. It's responsibility. Right? If I want to make more choices, that requires more responsibility, more accountability. If somebody else is making choices for me, where does the accountability fall? It falls on them. Right? I need them to do this. I need him to do that. I need her to do this. And I just keep asking for other people to do things. Ultimately, the responsibility will not fall on me. But now, do I have any choice? No. Whatever's dictated to me is what I'm going to have to do. Wealth is not having many possessions, but true wealth is feeling sufficiency in the soul. I think that one's that is very encompassing. Right? Right, it's contentment. Right? This idea of being content, this idea of rida, this idea of qana'a, right? This idea of just being happy with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me. Have you guys ever heard the saying, be pleased, not satisfied? No? What do you think it means? So over here, for example, sufficiency. Alhamdulillah, Allah has given me so much, and I'm just going to keep cruising like this.
You need to tie the horse, don't just leave it till everything.
Okay, well, I definitely need to tie my horse, a camel, for sure. I agree with that 100%. I'm just saying, I get to a position, whatever that might be. In my business, in my personal life, in my job. I'd be like, all right, I need to be sufficient, and I need to be content. This is good. Let me roll with this. Is that what it means? It's interesting. You guys called it complacency, right? So do you see the fine line here between complacency and contentment and satiety? It's tough, right? It's not as easy sometimes as we think it is. It's like, okay, well, I have this car. Alhamdulillah, Allah has given me this car. And then that's it.
No. Because it says continuous.
I need 4 cars, right?
Or if you're Imam Ghazāli, you might go back.
I'm sorry?
If you're Imam Ghazāli, you might go back to the camel.
Right, you might go back to the Camry, right? Like a 2-year-old man. The 2-year-old can't. So how do I draw that line? How do I know that I'm being complacent and being satisfied? Like I'm being happy with what Allah has given me.
Because you can be complacent, sorry. I was just going to say you could be complacent and not happy. And you could be pleased
Okay.
and not worry about it.
Okay. So you're saying that in order for me to test if I'm at a point of complacency, is it possible that I'm unhappy? No, there's a possibility. That's what I'm saying. Like I want to present this in a way that we can actually have a personal litmus test. Like, how do I know the difference as an individual between complacency and satisfaction?
Personal effort.
Yes.
Well, I think it's what is it used for?
Mm.
Sometimes I am complacent when I'm not even aware. And then I
Sure.
use a car, and then it's monkey,
Yeah.
and whatever. But the moment, that's why the dua,
Mm.
alhamdulillah, to connect to ni'mah, to connect to money.
Okay.
Connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that I have a car, that enables me to take me here and there. And then suddenly I can actually appreciate that I have it and I'm satisfied with it for that moment. Rather than just taking the car just right away and
So I appreciate the journey, but my question is, how do I know and differentiate? Yes, Mona. Oh, yeah, it's okay. Uh-huh. Okay. طيب. Okay. Oh, there's no effort. There's no further effort. I like that. Like, if you're complacent, you're not. Your efforts are what? You know what? I really like that. So over here, if I'm complacent, what's going to happen to my effort level?
You'll be lazy.
Right? My effort is actually going to go down. And if I'm satisfied, what's going to happen to my effort? All right, it's going to be one or the other, right? Either it's going to be consistent or it's going to increase. So satisfaction is actually what? It's a motivation. And complacency is what? Demotivation. No, perfect.
Like optimism.
What happened?
Like optimism.
Optimism? Why?
And pessimism.
I mean, they're opposites, if that's what you mean. Like, yeah, so like motivation and demotivation. Another example is, for example, if I have anger issues, right? If I have anger issues and I get angry and I don't want to yell at everyone who I deal with, so I go to anger management therapy, and after 12 weeks, I'm not yelling at everyone anymore. Only sometimes, though. So I've reached that point. Now, how, all right, alhamdulillah, I made it. I've managed my anger. Yes?
You gotta keep at it.
All right, I have to keep working at it, right? Again, and I think excellent. That's an excellent litmus test. Am I being motivated
Keep at it.
to keep at it, to get better, or am I getting worse, right? Am I being demotivated?
Is it because, at some level, the human's not
Satisfied.
with its current state, so
Yeah.
you're either going to be going up or down.
Yeah.
So you've got to be moving in one direction.
Right, so we as humans, you're absolutely right. Like, we're always moving, right? So even when we talk about stagnation, is it really like this? No, it's really, how should I represent it? It's more like this, right? Like, you're actually going back down. So this idea of stagnation, it's actually, it's a state where we're getting worse, right? We're not improving. And part of it is that personal satisfaction, and even this idea as a Muslim, if I'm a good father, for example, I should do what? I should work to be a better father, right? If I'm making my 5 daily prayers, if I'm reading Quran, what should I do? I should do more, right? Like, these are things like, subhanAllah, like, Islam is very cumulative. Meaning that once I reach a level, I want to do what? Right? I want to level up. I want to keep leveling up. And is that limited to spirituality? No, it's not. Where else do I want to level up? Right? You know what I mean? I want that entourage, bro. Like, so I have to work up, right? I want to work up socially, meaning that I want to be a better friend. I want to do it with all my relationships. I want to improve them. I want to become better. I want to become a better person. I want to become a better businessman. I want to become a better professional, right? And that is an issue of drive. And we all have to find ways where we are consistently and constantly driven. We have to be. And if I'm in a place or if I'm in a position where I'm not being driven, what do I need to do? So like if I'm complacent at my job, subhanAllah, what happens? Like, that complacency and the stagnation, we said there's actually a downturn. What happens to other aspects of my life? Right, they fall too. It's not like, okay, yeah, I'm getting worse financially, but spiritually I'm up. Right, is that usually the trajectory? Right, so like I'm getting poor and then my spirituality is going up. Does it work like that? No, not really. Yeah. So there's a difference. So when we talk about an upward trajectory, what does that mean? We're not talking about this, right? It doesn't happen at all. So what are those jolts? Those jolts are the movements, like it's those peaks and, ebbs and peaks? Is that what it is, right? Yeah.
Fluctuation?
Yeah.
Peaks and valleys.
Peaks and valleys. I think ebbs is the word too. Ebb and flow. Ebb and flow, thank you. So, see, I knew it was there. It was like in my vocabulary somewhere. So like these peaks and valleys, like when we talk about an upward trajectory, it's always going to be up and down. It's never going to be like a smooth, straight trajectory upward. Meaning that we're going to have moments where we're a little bit lower and we're going to have moments where we're a little bit higher. And some of those low moments, what are they? Those reminders that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends for us and gives us. But saying that, those are there to do what? Like even, and that's a very good point, even those things, even those reminders, why are we getting them? To maintain our trajectory. Because a person who is not keeping that standard, and a person who is okay with being complacent and getting worse, does that person get reminders? Usually not. So if things are going like really smoothly, this is when the companions actually used to worry. They'd be like, okay, well, all right, why isn't Allah testing me? Is there something that I'm doing wrong? Is there an issue? And then they would start going back and actually looking at their lives and be like, okay, is there a shortcoming? Have I done something wrong to someone? You know what I mean? And those are the times where we actually should worry. And when fitan would come, when tests would come, they'd actually, it'd be like a sigh of relief, like, okay, alhamdulillah. There's more hadith here. You guys can read them. I translated some of them. I didn't translate all of them. I thought it would get like really long. But they all fulfill very similar, and they have a very similar theme. Let me see if there are some that really stood out for me.
So the second one is that no matter how much dua you do, it's set for you, or like can dua change? So
this is a little bit of a trickier issue, but basically you have a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, ad-du'a yurud al-qadr, right? So the dua, it has an effect on your pre-decree, but that effect is like you have the larger pre-decree, right, which is basically unchangeable. And then you have the yearly decree that's set down, like on Laylatul Qadr. It is this one that they say that there can be a change in. But saying that, why is it that if this is more of a discussion on like, okay, well, everything's supposed to happen, why bother, right? Like if everything's already written and there's already a decree, then why keep doing actions? And there's a few answers to that. Like one of them is like, okay, do I know? Right, like even if, like we say Allah knows for sure, do I know what's gonna happen? All right, so if I don't know what's gonna happen, what should I do? Right, I need to keep working. I need to keep working, I keep needing to do good deeds, and I need to keep making dua. Why? Because I know that I am in need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes?
So, like the smaller, because there's
Lawh al-Mahfuz, yeah.
Yeah, and then there's like small ones like the angels, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So is that the ones that you like what the angels are like?
That's different. That's recording versus the Lawh al-Mahfuz has everything written of what is to come. Yes. Yes.
I just want to make sure I'm hearing it correctly more. So when you're talking, then just kind of go back to the first quote, and when we were talking about like the drive itself, are you more so saying like that drive that we have is in relation to the sufficiency of the soul?
Yeah. So if a person has that self-sufficiency in his soul and in his heart, it's actually going to push him to be better. Yes. So indulgence is something that we had spoken about previously, but how do I know if I'm falling into indulgence? So we had set a few criteria. What are some of them? Violating rights, right? And rights specifically of others, right? If I'm not giving my family their money, I've fallen into indulgence. What is the other one? Allah's rights. If I'm not giving my zakat, I've fallen into indulgence. And we said there's a third gauge also, which is what? That's that personal gauge. So these two are external and they're pretty easy to determine. This last one is the one that is I won't even say it's difficult, but we know when we do. An example that I'm sure many of us have experienced: you go out to eat at a restaurant and the bill's like $150 just for you. How well am I digesting that food? And how come I'm not doing it, right? Like if I'm like ultra wealthy, I probably won't care, but I'm just saying like for like, peons like me. Like, you know what I mean? Like you go out and you eat. So over here, and how am I going to feel about that meal personally? Right? I'm going to feel gross, right? I'm not going to feel good. And what is it that's giving me that feeling? It's that meter that we were talking about, like that internal gauge, right? So the heart. And that's just with this. And there's so many things that we spend on in our lives. Like when I go to the store and I go to choose shoes, I already know which ones I shouldn't be buying, right? I know which ones are indulgent to me. Like if I'm going to buy like sock, anything I go to buy, I already know, and I have a gauge internally that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me in my heart to tell me like okay, that is not worth that much. And for some people, it is, right? And it's very important for us to be honest with ourselves and honest with those decisions. Again, more hadith about being content. Here, a man came to the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Messenger of Allah, teach me, but make it concise. Just give me some short, simple instructions so I can go live my life. He said, when you stand to pray, pray like a man bidding farewell. Make your prayer like your last prayer. Do not say anything for which you'll have to apologize. Meaning, really think before you speak. Right? So if you're going to say something, make sure that you think about before you say it so that you don't have to worry about the repercussions. And give up hope for what other people have. Don't covet what other people have. And I think I think it's a hadith. But if you want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's happiness, then seek from Him, right? If I want Allah to be happy with me, I should seek from Him. And if I want people to be happy, I shouldn't seek from them. Right? So if I don't, and subhanAllah, even the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's really interesting his relationship with the companions. So when it came to asking for personal things from his companions, he never would. Right? He never would. And there are a couple of reasons. If the Prophet ﷺ ever asked for his companion, like something from his companions, do you think they would ever ask for it back? No. Right? So he didn't want to put them in that situation. That was number one. And number two, he really wanted them to feel like, I don't need anything from you. I don't need a dime. I don't need anything from you for myself at all. And this was something, even when he needed to borrow money, where did he go? Like he went to the Jews, right? He went to the Jews. Like he had like so many rich companions that were available to him and that were there. But when he himself needed personal money and personal funding, he actually went to the Jews. And again, this idea of showing and presenting to the companion and really making them feel like, I only want your spiritual good. That's all I want for you. I don't need any worldly benefit from you. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This hadith is a little bit longer, but the part here is what I want to really point out. So he said that the companions, that this drive of self-sufficiency and this push for self-sufficiency, it was so strong with them that even if the whip would fall from their hand, and this is what they used to actually, you know, to hit their camels or hit their horses to make them speed up, if it fell from their hand, what would they do? They would stop, they would get down, and they would pick it up. Why is that important? Why mention that as an example of self-sufficiency? Because you're not ordering someone to do it for you. Okay, and there's a balance between this and what we had talked about last chapter too, right? So last chapter he had talked about taking advantage of services. What is the difference between this and that? Right? If there's something that I'm doing, have the humbleness to what? Or have the humility to follow through. Right? And maintaining that sense of humility is something that's really important. Does it mean that I shouldn't outsource labor?
No, it was like you mentioned, like you have cleaning services, but you still try to keep that area clean. Not just like, oh,
Yeah, for sure. Like, oh, I have someone to, you know, I have someone to wash my car for me, and like I'm gonna go drive through mud. You know what I mean? Like, having that humility is something that's really important. Or if that opportunity ever arose that I had to wash my car, what would I do? I would wash it. I wouldn't be too proud to do that. So that's what a lot of this discussion, having that balance, is about.
I don't want to say.
Yes.
So in many situations, we might find that some parents, you know, they have to see the remote. Like,
May Allah guide us.
it's like, oh, come here and pick it up. You know,
Yeah.
pass it to me, you know.
Yeah.
What message, you know?
Sure. So like, I had a brother, mashallah. You know, he just got a new house, and he got, you know, those washing machines that are like Wi-Fi and stuff. Yeah, I don't know how that would work really, but it's a thing. So it's like, so he was like, yeah, you know, like I have like wireless washing machine and dryer and stuff like that. I was like, yeah, I do too. He's like, really? And I was like, even my stove. He's like, really? Yeah. I was like, yeah, I just call my kids and tell them. So there, you know, at what point, like, you know, asking your kids or telling your kids to do things, there's a few reasons for them, right? If you're doing it out of laziness, like that's okay. And if you're, yeah, but you don't want it to get to a point where the children start what? Resenting you, right? Like you don't want it to get to that point. But is it okay for parents, or like, it's not just okay, like you should ask your children to do things, right? It's important, because where else are they gonna get trained? You know, where else are they going to learn these things? You know, I have people come to me and like, oh, I didn't learn how to cook until I was in college, right? You know, I was like, or I didn't learn how to clean or use a vacuum cleaner, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, that's bad parenting. Like, you know, by not allowing our children to do these things, I haven't done anybody any favors, right? These are things that our children should know how to do. Like, it's like, oh, you know, I had to unclog the toilet, and it's like, yeah, I'm good. Like these are life skills that are important to have. And if they don't learn them at home, if we don't teach them as parents, then who's going to teach them? No one, right? It's like, or they're going to be put in situations where, like, you know what I mean, like they're standing above the toilet with like looking at a YouTube video, right? Like, like you don't want that. Like you want to be in a situation where you actually gave them the training, where why? Because the idea is what? Self-sufficiency. Like we want them to be self-sufficient. And they're not going to be self-sufficient if I'm not training them to be self-sufficient. SubhanAllah, sorry, tangent, but there was a family, they were complaining about their son. They were like, oh, you know, all he does is listen to his wife, you know, he doesn't listen to, you know, everything she tells him to do, and blah, blah, blah. And we were like, okay, well, how was he raised? Well, you know, I used to tell him to do this and this and this and this. It's like, okay, so you trained him to listen to a woman his whole life, and now that you put him with another woman, what is he going to do? Like, that's all he's going. You didn't train him to be independent. You didn't train him to be self-sufficient. You didn't train him for these things. How is he going to learn them on his own? Right? And the bad results that happen from this, from ill parenting, it's very sad. It's very upsetting. You know, we have to instill these things in our children. Yes. Yes, I have. Yeah. That we have a different saying here. Ours is happy husband, happy life. Yes. Which one? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Which one? Number 4. Sufyan said, the best of this world is that which does not test you, and the best of which tests you is that which slips through your hands. So if there are things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't test me with, those are the things that I should take advantage of. So for example, if I like, I don't know, like how it worked when I grew up is like, whenever the car like got old, like and my parents would buy a new one, that would be the one that I drove, right? And I would make dua every time I got in the car hoping it would start. So how did Allah test me? He tested me with that car. It was an old car. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, at a later point in my life, He allowed me to have a nice car. I don't have to worry about it. I just get in, I put gas, and I drive. So what is He talking about here? He said, that's the best of this world. Why? Because it's something I don't have to think about. I don't have to worry about. And the best which tests you is that which slips through your hand. Meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He might have tested me with wealth, but I didn't achieve it. I never got it. So why is it good for me? Because had I gotten it, what would have happened? I probably would have been in a worse situation. Yes? Mm-hmm. I'll have to think about that for a second. Hold on. Let me try to process that. So, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't write that I achieve something, why did He do that? Because it's for my benefit. If He writes that I achieve something, but I don't use that thing well, what about that situation? Right? That's a test, but I failed, right? No, it's a blessing, but I used it in a bad way, right? So if I get this wealth and like I waste it all, right? It's like I get $1 million, I'm like, I know exactly what to do with this, and I go and I buy a yacht, right? So, or I buy a plane, right? So these things, huh? Yeah, it probably might not be enough. I might need a little bit more. So over here in these situations where I'm wasting my wealth, I'm wasting my money, then I fall into debt, you know what I mean? Like I start like foreclosing on a lot of my things. Like I just didn't use that money in a good way. But had I never gotten it, I would never have had to. Like I would have never done those things. But that use, like maybe if I build up to it, or maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put me in that situation so that I could take it as a lesson. But at the end of the day, like nobody likes going up high so quickly and then crashing back down. This one was interesting. He said, a wise man said, I see an envious man the most distressed, meaning that he's always worried, right? Because he's always worried about what other people are doing and saying. Content man the most happy. So if an individual is content, you'll always see him happy. A greedy man the most impatient at the times of distress, right? He's always trying to get something. So because of that, he's always going to be impatient. The one with the least bread, the most turned away from this world. And this is usually by choice, right? It's not because he's forced to be in that situation. And the most remorseful, the zealous scholar. This one I thought was really interesting.
What is
Zealous is like extreme. It's actually mufrat is the word. Why is that?
He loves abundance. He may have gone too far in the principle.
Right. So basically, what happens is like if you have scholars who are like ultra conservative, what happens? I'm sorry? It's not sustainable, right? So like it's like this is haram and you can't do this and you have to wear like that and if you and it's that and you're like you know women you only need to wear black and abayas and like you guys your pants are too long, like you know what I mean, like and you're just constantly going at it, right? You're just constantly going at it and like you're just burning through everything, making everything haram, and then you grow up. What happens?
Now you have that understanding.
Right, you have that understanding now, and looking back, how do you feel? You feel stupid. How do you feel? Remorseful. Right? That at this point in your life, like you were so binary. You know what I mean? Like everything was like black and white. It was this and that. And then binary. I know you're non-binary. So like, so when you're like that, and then you get to a point, you're like, oh man, they're like shades of gray. You know, like not everything is black and white. And all the stuff I said to the people before, right? There's a lot of remorse there. There's a lot of remorse there. And it works the other way too. Like, what if you're like, you start off like, you're like super liberal, like, no, you know, women don't have to wear hijab, and like prayer, like, yeah, just do it when you can. It really means a dua. You know what I mean? Like, so you have that spectrum too. And then if a person, inshallah, like, you know, becomes a little bit more moderate, what happens? The same thing, right? They become remorseful of all the things that they taught and that they had told others.
So what do you call this thing in the middle that they made
Istiqamah? Yeah. Oh, this was a funny story that he shared. He says, Sha'bi narrates that a man basically what happens is like he catches a small bird and he has a conversation with the bird. So I'm kind of doubting the veracity of the story. But anyway, he has this conversation with this bird, and the bird says, if you let me go, I'll tell you 3 things. And he was like, the first one I'll tell you in your hand. So just open your hand, I'll tell you in your hand. He said, and when I get to this tree, I'll tell you the second. And when I get to the mountain, I'll tell you the third. He was like, all right, bet. So he opened his hand and he said, okay, what do you have to tell me? He said, don't remorse over what you've lost. So he's like, okay, it's a good piece of advice. And he let him go. And he flew up to the tree, and then he said, don't believe that the impossible is possible. So he's like, okay. He said, man, you lost out. He's like, what? What do you mean? He said, if you had slaughtered me, I had 2 20-kilo jewels in my stomach. And he's like, wait, what? And then so the man, when he looked at the man was like, he was visibly upset. He was like, man, you know what I mean? Like, oh man, like I missed out. And then he was like, okay, well, at least tell me the third thing. He was like, well, you forgot the first 2. He said he forgot, like he was preparing him for that. He's like, you forgot the first 2. And what was the first one? Don't remorse over what you lost, which he did. And he's like, listen, even if you put me, all my meat and my bones and my feathers onto a scale, I wouldn't equal 20 kilos. Like, my weight wouldn't be that much. So why do you think that I would be able to carry, forget 2, even 1 of these jewels in my stomach? So over here, going back to this, how do we deal with this? So Ghazāli says we're supposed to stay where? So over here, right? Ideally, he's like, nah, over here. You should be like daily. He's like, but I'll give you guys a little bit extra, and I'll give you the whole month. Yes?
I'll be honest, I'm a little confused. I'll say what I'm thinking out loud.
Yeah.
Because earlier we were talking about how like sufficiency itself is kind of like having that drive to go forward. So
Yeah.
when I see it in the aspect of like poverty, I'm thinking like, oh, maybe thinking of the future for family. I want to save up to get a house or something like that.
Sure.
And now seeing this, it's like, okay, well, is that, it's confusing me a little bit because am I feeling like I'm not satisfied with what I already have?
Okay, so if you're confused, that's good. And why is that? Because you're like, okay, this isn't equaling the message that he's giving. So what happened? What is the topic that he's talking about? Huh? So he's talking about what? He's talking about spiritual poverty. He's talking about sufficiency, yes? And if I have this much, I should be what? I should be content. But if I have more, so he's saying the problem isn't this wanting more or having more. The problem, again, is this idea of qana'ah. That I am not going to be content unless I have a 6-month salary. I'm not going to be content unless I have 10 years of salary. I'm not going to be content unless I have $1 million. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He's given me enough for today, alhamdulillah, ahmadullah wa shukru. But does this mean that I don't strive for more? I don't work for more? No. Does that help? That's all it is. It's just a talk about sufficiency. That's all he's talking about here. Because when he first presented the concept, I was like, all right, where's he going with this? You know? And then I realized, like, oh, he's just talking about qana'ah. He's just talking about how do I, is basically what he's saying is like, if I've reached here, or here, even here, then I should be pleased. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taken care of me. All of those things, like about my food, my clothing, my dress, that stuff's taken care of. Why? Because I have a month's salary saved up. Like I have a month's worth of expenditures taken care of. Now what do? I need to focus on worship and bettering myself. And bettering myself, what are the results of that? I probably will get more money. I probably will have better relationships. I'll probably draw near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And all of that extra money, what can I do with it? And he had spoken about this last chapter. I use it for services. I use it to help others. And he even mentions services, right? So hiring a babysitter, right? Or hiring a cook, or hiring a maid. He says that those things are good. Why?
Gives you the time to...
Because it frees up my time. It frees up my time to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because worshiping Allah, I can't what? I can't outsource that. Like I can't pay someone else to do that for me. But those things that only I can do, those are the things I should be focusing on. And even this idea, I know there are a lot of parents who are against this idea of like having a maid or having all these things. Okay, if it maximizes my time with my children, doesn't it make more sense for me to have a maid to clean up? Doesn't it make more sense to have, if I can have someone cook on my behalf? Why? Because I can spend time, I can focus on my kids. I actually need to be doing that though, right? I can't use that as an excuse. Any questions? Yes.
So, you talked about like abrogation earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading about it just recently too. And so, I couldn't wrap my head around the reason for like exposing that, right? Like, because if there's things that were revealed,
Yeah.
then like unrevealed,
Mm-hmm.
like why would people remember that they were unrevealed? Like, you know.
Sure.
And
What purpose?
does that serve
What purpose does it serve? To show Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy upon us. Like he could have made the book significantly longer had he wanted to. But if you actually compare it to other religious texts, it's relatively short. It's not that long a work.
Right, but like he could have made it that from the beginning. So like why reveal something?
Sure. So abrogation is a longer conversation, but just in summary, one of the reasons that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually introduces this concept of abrogation, we have to realize that Islam was spread over a 23-year time period. And because of that, the needs of the nation and the needs of the Muslims changed. And because those needs changed, what happened? There are certain rules, regulations, and laws that had to be adjusted. That's all. And because of those adjustments, there are certain readings that were required, and then at another point they weren't required, right? The messaging went out in a different way.
I have follow-up questions for this.
No, that's fine. Like I said, abrogation, I talk about it in my preservation of the Quran class, and that is like 2 classes in and of itself. But saying that, like I said, in general, these are the reasons for it, is to change rulings, right, as the needs of the community changed, right? And the other thing is like, removing, because the Quran is a very dense work, right? It's like a really dense book in the sense it's like it's a lot of information and lessons within like in a small compact frame, and the idea is to kind of remove anything that would distract from the messaging. It's very different from, like we said, like the Bible. The Bible will have like a lot of stories like, okay, he was born here and then he moved here and he went here, blah, blah. We don't have a lot of linear stories in the Quran. Like even the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, which is probably one of the most complete stories that we have, there are huge pockets of his life that are just missing, that we don't have even a discussion of. Why? Because the idea is brevity and keeping it short. Yes?
I just need your help in how do you answer people? There's a group of people that sometimes I come across in my work that'll say, well, yeah, times have changed. Why do you still listen to that? Why can't a woman lead the prayer?
Yeah.
And masjid and things like that? Because times have changed. So it's the same argument you're using that for abrogation. But how do you respond?
Because that happened actively in the presence of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? So that's one major difference. The other difference is like, well, at that point, if you start making changes, like where does it stop? Like, and at what point does it become, like at what point is it still Islam? Because we have clear commandments and rulings from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that say that this is it, Al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum. Like today we've completed the religion. Meaning what? There's nothing that's going to change, right? There might be different understandings of things, but fundamentally the religion is not going to change. Yes? Never. Yeah, so satisfied means that there's a couple meanings, right? Satisfied means being pleased with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me, And because I'm happy and I'm pleased with what He has given me, I'm going to strive to be better. I have to work to be better. And if I'm not working to be better, then I'm not pleased, I'm not satisfied. And Allah knows best. وصلى الله على خير خلق نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Jazakumullah khair. I'll see you guys next week. Like I had announced in the previous class, this Ramadan I plan on doing like a Quran-centric Seerah class after Taraweeh on Friday and Saturday night, inshallah. So every weekend we're going to after Taraweeh.